Good morning, friends and neighbors, countrymen, and barrel-chested freedom fighters all around the world. Hey, man, you got the old paratrooper back again. And I've got a special guest today. His name is Eddie Kennedy. He's a veteran paratrooper from back in the day. He preceded me in the same company I was in the 82nd, by about 15 years. And he has an interesting bit of airborne history concerning the Texas Army National Guard and jump school. And man, Eddie, it's really glad to have you here today.
All right,
How
Jerry.
are you
Well,
doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you. And I'm looking forward to the discussion here.
Okay, cool, man. Hey, can you just kind of give us kind of some background on your life story, how you wound up in the military and in the airborne, and we'll just go from there, man.
All right. Yeah. When I was in high school, I was in high school 1968 through 72, and that was the Vietnam era.
Mhm.
In fact, the height of Vietnam was 68, 69 from the perspective of troops over there. And my father, who had served in the Army during the Korean War, he was concerned that I would be drafted
Mhm.
and wind up in Vietnam. So he thought the more military type training I had, the better it would be. And the relationship at that time with my father was real simple. He told me what to do, and I did it. So I didn't want to because I knew being in the ROTC was not the way to meet girls in high school at the time. And but I did it anyway because I was told to do it. And uh, we were, I would say, at that time in particular, anything military related, if you were, it was not a good time for social engagements with other people. So the group of us that were in ROTC, there was a number of us that became quite tight because we kind of just closed in on each other and such. And being in the ROTC program at the time, I formed some very good bonds and friends and lifelong bonds, and that ultimately, and I'll get to the 82nd, how that all relates to it. But we also became people where I started becoming a little bit enamored with the military.
Mhm.
Uh, we all wanted to go infantry. We all wanted to go airborne now. And I kind of think, I don't know what we thought back then, because I don't think we knew what infantry and airborne was other than just kind of labels,
It was
but built
it
in
was
our
the
mind.
brand. The
Yeah, exactly. So in 72, when I graduated from high school, the year before, one of our buddies in ROTC had dropped out of school, joined the Army, and he was at Fort Bragg in the 82nd. And one of the guys on the year of graduation, my best friend at the time, he graduated and he joined the Army and wound up and volunteered for the 82nd, was there. So two of a group of us were already in the 82nd when I graduated, or that first year after high school. And my buddy Brian and I, who is another ROTC, good best friend over my life now, we're still very close. Uh, he and I went to college, and I said probably went isn't proper. We signed up for college, but our grades reflected we didn't show up in classes very much.
Mhm.
And so at the end of the first year, and clearly college was not important to me, and I actually had a little bit of a yearning to catch up with my buddies at Bragg, but I didn't make that step yet.
Yeah.
But Brian called me one day and said that he had just joined the Army, and that was my catalyst to get me going. So I went down that day to his recruiter. I'm sure his recruiter was thrilled
Oh
because he
yeah.
got two dudes in 2 days that both joined up, wanted to go infantry, wanted to go and volunteer to go to the 82nd. And Brian and I did. And the other thing we had a buddy program. So he and I went together. We were only guaranteed to go to basic training together,
Mhm.
which we did. We went to Fort Polk, South Fort Polk, for basic training. And back then, infantry wasn't combined like it is now for the training. You went to your basic, and then you went to a different location for your AIT
Mhm.
and infantry AIT, which happened to be North Fort Polk, which was called Tigerland at the time, and that was because that was still prepping people for Vietnam, and so Tigerland had a lot of Vietnamese style villages that you'd train in and stuff like that.
And they're,
So, but
they're,
Brian and I, yeah,
they're,
Brian,
they still call it Tigerland.
they do. The name started there.
Yeah.
back, you'd go through training. They had, huts and all this kind of stuff
Mhm.
and POW interrogation and how you would, again, a good number of infantrymen who wound up in Vietnam went through Tigerland and the part of their AIT. Of course,
Yeah.
back then you went through basic AIT and generally went directly over to Vietnam, unless you did
Speaking,
something like school.
speaking of tigers, let me get back
I,
to this
I
one.
saw a tail.
Oh, you little sorry about that.
Better watch it. Push a button and you'll lose all the interview. So,
Yeah, he thinks he thinks he owns this
um,
computer and likes to
I
see.
understand that. So anyway, Brian and I wound up in the same platoon for AIT. And then when we graduated AIT, we went to Fort Benning for jump school, and we were in the same company for jump
Yeah.
school. And then in jump school, we were supposed to go to the 82nd, but we were supposed to have leave because we hadn't had any leave up to this stage. On our fifth jump on the drop zone, this LT came up to us as we were turning in the chutes, the rally point, and he said that all the personnel in the jump school who were assigned to the 82nd were to report or to move over here in this place. So we all moved, and there were a bunch of us
Yeah.
uh, because back then, if you went, the jump school classes were smaller than they appear to be now because I've seen them since then. And so a high percentage of us were going to division, which was the only airborne unit at the time, other than some SF unit.
But
Uh,
just out
yeah,
of curiosity, how big was your class?
I'd have to look it up, but I'm going to say we had like 4 platoon worth, so
Yeah.
150 to 200
Okay. Yeah.
personnel, something like that. I do know that watching my daughter go through jump school, my stepson go through jump school, they had classes that were significantly larger
Wow. Yeah.
uh, than that. And there's a whole discussion of the Black Hats there at Benning. This has been about 5 to 10 years ago about what they thought about it. Because one thing we observed when we watched it was the ratio of Black Hats to students was a lot lower
Mhm.
when my kids went through jump school than when Brian and I went through it. It seemed like you couldn't
Yeah.
blink without some Black Hat being in your
Yeah.
butt,
When I was
kind of.
there, you couldn't spit without hitting a black hat.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. So we went over there, and he said that we were supposed to report at some location back at where the barracks were with our Class A's, which was back then khakis, and our duffel bag, and that our leaves had been canceled, and we were going straight to Bragg. We were going to war. Now we first thought it was just a joke, and then what's going on, sir? And you go, no, get going. Okay, we did. Next day, I was on that day. I got on that sometime dark 30 arrived at Bragg. I went through Repel. Usually, I remember like a 3 day processing. Well, by mid afternoon, I was down at Alpha Company, 1st Battalion, 504th Infantry Regiment, lined up with a whole bunch of guys I didn't know, except for one, Brian. Brian and I were both assigned to the same squad, which was very, very strange. So that's what led to our start of everything we did. You can look on any order we have, and whether it's a jump manifest, a promotion, or whatever, and his and not my name are on those things together.
Wow.
Uh, but we were caught. The division had been called out for the Yom Kippur War, October of '73.
You mean there was
Uh,
unrest in the Middle East?
oh yeah, yeah. Who
Wow.
would have thought?
We thought
So
that was a new thing.
yeah. Well, it had a lot of interesting things because the division was being trained for two purposes at that time. It still had I think it was called DRF or GRF, whatever it's
DRF
called
is
now.
what we
Yeah.
get. DRF,
It
Division
was
Ready Force.
division ready. Yeah. We still had the same mission that if you needed to send a large size element anywhere in the world in a short period of time, we were the unit that was to go in. And that purpose has never changed with division over the decades. But we were called up because the Soviets at that time had been starting to support the mainly Egyptians, Syrians, and Jordan. I don't remember, maybe Jordan or Lebanese, one of the two. But those are the three that had pounced on Israel
Mhm.
during the Yom Kippur War. And Israel at the beginning was kind of losing, so But then they turned the tide because what happened, the U.S. military provided them with a new anti-armor weapon called TOWs, and they
Mm-hmm.
started using TOWs. And Division still had 106 recoilless rifles at the time, but Division was the first one to receive TOWs in the Army as a U.S. military.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but anyway, they sent them and they started turning the tide. Part of it was they did a lot of good things. But the Soviets now said that they were going to start supporting the Egyptians, let's say, and they were going to send in like 6 paratroop divisions to support that. Well, the retaliation and the negotiations, well, we'll send in the 82nd.
Yeah.
And what happened is for the next couple of weeks, it was a back and forth. We'd go to Green Ramp, load up behind C-141s because that was the aircraft with in addition to C-130 back then. Brand new gear, brand new LBB, brand new weapon, brand new parachute, brand new everything. And it would go on, off. And finally, the Israelis started winning. The Soviets backed off. And so we were called down. And so finally, Brian and I did get to take our leave.
Yeah.
But what was interesting about that period was up to that point, the division was really being trained for 2 fronts. One was Vietnam. There wasn't any assurance we weren't going back to Vietnam.
Mm-hmm.
We were pulling out, but we weren't totally out yet. And 2, which was the bigger one, was the Soviet threat of coming across Eastern Europe and into Western Europe.
Yep.
So the division was really being trained for those 2 things. But all of a sudden, somebody realized, hey, you might have to jump into the desert, which was our mission. I found out later we were supposed to jump into the Sinai
Mm-hmm.
and then start providing support. And so then they said, well, gee, maybe not even desert. Maybe we have to jump in snow, or maybe we have to jump in swamps. Or so they started for the next year. We went on intense training of jump. And it was interesting because if you look at my jump manifest, the number of jumps I had in the first year were equal to what a lot of people spend 3 or 4 years in division have that many jumps. We were always going someplace, jumping in to pick the crappiest place to go jump and spend some time in, and
Yeah.
then jump back, And so like we went to White Plains Missile Base in New Mexico for desert training, which I always thought was funny because we were wearing our jungle camouflage fatigues,
Mm-hmm.
hiding in the desert. We didn't know they didn't have equipment. They didn't have
Yeah. They didn't have a
any
desert.
equipment for desert training. But again, who would have thought? Because it was kind of laughing why we're training for the desert. And unfortunately, from 1990-ish on, we
Yeah.
spent a lot of time in deserts and stuff. But yeah, that's a long-winded speech about how I got the division. And I was in Alpha Company. Brian and I were both at that time 11 Hotel, which is anti-armor, so we were 106 people. But then we were the first units to get TOWs, so we
Mm-hmm.
adopted the TOWs. And then they dropped the 11H and made everybody 11H 11 Bravo.
Yeah.
And then in 75, they took all the AT platoons in each line company, the recon platoon, which was a battalion HQ, and the 4 deuces. They brought them all together, and there was, I think, Signal was about added,
Yeah.
and they formed the first combat support company.
Mm-hmm.
And then so Brian and I moved from Alpha Company to the combat support company,
Yeah.
and then I finished off my tour and then got off of active duty when I ETS in May of 76.
Sounds like you had a pretty fulfilling career in division. You got to do a lot of stuff.
Well, I did, and we trained a lot. Panama, the Jungle Warfare School down there. Like I said, we went a lot of places. It wasn't good for the home life. I can attest to that.
Yeah.
My wife at the time will really attest to that. But it was good training. Most of the division when I first got there heavily weighted with Vietnam veterans. There wasn't anybody who was E5 above that didn't have a CIB. And that was good because we had some really experienced people training, cherries like me
Mm.
coming into the thing, and that was good. One of the best things that happened was division, though. Like I mentioned, we were supposed to be as forefront, but against the Soviets. And Soviets, if you look at what Russia did in Ukraine, it's exactly what we were trained
Yeah.
for. Only we had 106s. We didn't even have a 90 millimeter. We had 106s or laws. That was your anti-armor.
That's not
Uh,
a lot.
Not a lot. And so we got the TOWs, and to replace the 106s, which is a good start. There's a lot of negatives on the tow because back then, I don't know now, but they had the wire guided, so they're
I
kind of
think
hard
they're
to shoot through. Yeah, I think they're laser now or something.
I think they're wire guide, but I think there's a laser targeting too. I'm not sure. I'm not up to date on tow, to
I
be
would
honest.
like to think they aren't, because you can't shoot through forest and jungles and trees with a wire guided
Missile.
uh, missile. And but anyway, we had those, and but we didn't have anything between the toe and a lot, and so they brought in dragons, the
Mhm.
first dragons, and they took a person from each battalion to be on the test of the dragon, which is a single, is like the toe only for single. They have a different weapon now that
It's a
replaces that.
javelin replaced dragon,
Yeah, yeah.
and when I was in the division, we had dragons, and
Mhm.
yeah, that's a challenging weapon system right there.
Well, yeah, I was on the test team under a guy, a lieutenant colonel from the pen, and we spent about.
All right, looks like we will got a little freeze right there. See if we can fix this.
All
Now we're
right.
back. Yeah.
So, okay, good. So this lieutenant colonel who ran this thing, well, I was mentioning, I guess I have the honor of being the first person to ever shoot a dragon, live dragon, and stuff. But what was really cool about this, the colonel who was in charge of, his name is Roger Donlin,
Oh my
and
God, I've heard of
I
him.
didn't know at the time. He was he was the coolest officer I ever worked for. I liked him. He told me his real story about being a West Point, being kicked out of West Point, da 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 da. Well, he was the first Medal of Honor recipient in Vietnam, and I
Yeah.
didn't know that till we were flying to Redstone and we were wearing our uniforms, and I didn't pay attention to his stack. And some guy came up and congratulated some veteran, and that's when I realized he was a Medal of Honor recipient, and which of course amazed me at the time. And now we're at his story; it was even amazed me more. But he just passed away this a few months ago. But this man was a tremendous man. So I look back with, that's probably one of the highlights. All right,
All right, we're back
we're
again.
back on. All right. So anyway, that was division. That was my time in division.
Yep. Well, that's cool, man. Finishing up that. So it's not mid 1970s, 76. You're getting out,
Yep.
living the dream. What's a happening there?
Well, I was in my hippie van and I was growing my hair back and growing my scraggly beard. I could grow hair again without my first sergeant, harassing me. So I did it. And then about 3 or 4 months out, I wanted to go to college. What happened when I ETS, my wife at the time, she said, it's either me or the Army. Said, well, I'm going to get out of the Army then, and I'm going to try college again. Only I'm really going to try. And if I fail at college, I'm going to come back in the service, because my buddies, you remember, all those buddies of mine were still at Bragg,
Mm-hmm.
and I missed them. I was missing them already. So anyway, I got out, and I went back home. Home is Houston, Texas, and I enlisted. I signed up for classes at University of Houston, and I was driving to college one day. And people who are from Houston might know this, but on Fannin and OST, the intersection, there was I thought it was a reserve or a National Guard. I didn't know which one, but I knew it was a reserve building there, because when we were ROTC, we used to go there for doing drill competitions. Well, I'm driving along, and as I'm driving past it, I looked up and there's this big sign. It had emblem on it. The emblem was a kind of a shield, blue shield with a T in the middle of it.
Mm-hmm.
And okay, but it had an airborne tab on top of it. I
Yeah.
thought, whoa, what is this? So I turned in the parking lot. I go in the building because I was just trying to find out, what airborne units here. I never heard
Yeah.
of any airborne unit other than the 82nd.
Hey,
And yeah,
hey, I hate to cut you short. Can I pause just a second? I've got
yeah,
somebody
absolutely.
on my door.
Captain. Okay, so like I say, I walked to the building, was greeted by a captain. He was wearing khakis, and he had his blouse boots and his wings, and he had a light blue crest behind the wings. And and such. And he, greeted me and asked me, what was I, interested in or whatever. And I said, well, I'm interested in what unit is this? Airborne or a unit? And he goes, well, we're the 36th Airborne Brigade of the Texas Army National Guard. And I said, oh, interesting. And he goes, yes, we're an infantry, basically an infantry unit. Like I said, airborne. And I said, why are you interested? And I said, well, I don't know. I'm just kind of interested, kind of. He goes, well, he started saying, well, look, if you're interested, to joining, there's a lot of benefits. And he started giving me the sales pitch and all that stuff. But he said, this is infantry. You'll have to go to basic and AIT, which is a very rough, tough, and kind of thing. A little bit of the machoism there. And I kind of raised my hand to like he goes, yeah. And I said, well, I'm prior service. Oh, you are? Yeah. He said, how long you been out? And I go, well, about 4 months, 3 or 4 months, whatever it was. And he says, well, what was your MOS? I said, well, I was 11 Bravo. Oh, infantry. Well, then you won't have to go to basic and AIT. And in my mind, I say, well, that's good because I ain't doing that again. Because particularly switching back a little bit, I took basic and AIT at Fort Polk,
Yeah.
but from May through September, and World War II wooden shacks
Yeah.
when we weren't out. That's as even a boy from the Gulf Coast of Texas, that knocked my stuff in the dirt and that heat and humidity. I would not a fan of Fort Polk. So anyway, he goes, well, great. Well, he says, well, that we can waive that. Well, that's good. He says, but we are airborne, and jump schools are very rough, tough. Da da da. And I kind of raised my hand again. Are you airborne qualified? And I said, yes, I am. I was in the 82nd, and his whole demeanor changed at that point. And he kind of how many jumps you got? And I said, well, I have 50 and military jumps because I was skydiving at the time too. It's 50 military jumps. And he goes, are you a jump master? I said, yeah, I have my senior rating. And it was like heavens opened and manna from heaven dropped down on him. And I didn't understand why at the time, but it made sense later which I did join the Guard, that they couldn't get people. It was into Vietnam. People were not enlisting in the Guard to avoid active duty, which a number of the people did
Yeah.
back then. And again, military was not the way to meet girls.
No.
So it was like no one was doing it. And being an airborne unit, they did not have a lot of jump masters. In fact, they were very scarce on them.
Sure.
So he asked me what rank I was. And I said, well, I was a hard sergeant E5. And he goes, well, there is a platoon sergeant slot at where we drill in Brenham, Texas, of a recon platoon open. And I didn't know what drill meant at the time, but he says, we'll give you that slot and we'll promote you to E6. Well, I said, well, okay, but I'm not sure I want to do this. In my mind, I thought the idea of keep on jumping sounded pretty cool.
Yeah.
But I didn't want to be committed,
Yeah.
and so I said, what happens if, how do I, what am I committed to? How many years do I have to sign up? Because you're prior service, you can quit anytime you want, unless we're called up for deployment. And he kind of snickered because back then the Guard and reserves did not get called this is
No.
post-Vietnam. There's no way we were going to be called up for anything other than civil disturbances or something like that. Now that changed a lot for the reserve and Guards couple decades later for sure. But anyway, at that time, so I thought, okay, well, no, why not? I'll give it a try because it added a couple $1,000s a year to my salary, which was like $6,000 or $8,000 from the GI Bill. So for them, it was decent money, and I got to keep on jumping.
Yeah.
So I reported to Brenham, Texas, a guy named Sergeant Jaster, who was the full-time Guard person there. Great guy, great guy. He I was getting introduced to the platoon, which I had the recon platoon, which I was a platoon sergeant, and great guys. Most of these guys were prior service. Most of
Yeah.
these guys were Vietnam vets, with the 173rd, the 101st, stuff like that. So solid group of guys, and I was very pleased to be part of them because again, I was the youngest guy in the platoon yet.
And you're the platoon sergeant.
I'm a platoon sergeant, and a year later, I got promoted to E7. So I'm a 20. I think I was 23 or 24 when I was at E7, and
Wow.
only in the Guard could do this type of thing.
Yeah.
But I had a great get it set of guys, and I learned more from them than I could ever pretend to have taught them. So that experience was good. But what also happened, Sergeant Jaster mentioned uh, being a jump master. Did I want to be a black hat at their jump school? This is the first I'd ever heard of it. What do
Yeah.
you mean, jump school? I'm not going to Benning. No, no, no. We have one in the Guard. So that's how I learned about the jump school that the 36th Airborne Brigade ran for
Yeah. I mean, that was cool because when I showed up in the Texas Guard in I think it was like 2008 or something, I'd heard rumors there were 34-foot towers at Camp Mabry and that this and that. I mean, they jump school, and I was like, what?
Yeah.
I was like, okay, news to me.
Well, it lasted, and I had to dig a little into the history of it to go back and regurgitate it. But there were 7 classes that the 36th ran,
Mhm.
and I was a black hat in numbers 3 through 7. So I wasn't in the first and second, but the third course, which is the first one I was in, started in September 29th, 1976. And the last one they ran, number 7, was in July of 79 is when it started.
Mhm.
Uh, what I found out was class number 1, and I didn't know this, but I learned again, the 36 was assigned to the 82nd, was attached to the 82nd.
Yeah.
So the Advanced Airborne School of the 82nd was the one who came and ran the first school at
Mhm.
Camp Mabry.
Yeah.
Uh, and they had guardsmen there just to observe and learn and probably run and get their coffee and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So I'm sure they were totally abused. On the second class, it was a transition class where the 82nd was still running it, but the jump masters from the 36 were more participative. On the third one, which I was there, my first one, that was the one where we actually ran it, but the 82nd evaluated, was in evaluation mode. So behind the scenes, and then number 4 through 7, we ran it. There was no 82nd personnel there
Oh,
at that time. But we had a 34-foot tower. We had obviously a number of platforms for training PLFs. Uh, we had what the Swinglander trainer is the one where you slide, just go on a cable and you
yeah.
drop off. We had pieces of equipment like that. Obviously, there was no 250-foot tower,
No.
but we had enough to teach guys how to fall out of the airplane, let gravity do its thing, and then try to keep from breaking legs when they landed.
Yeah.
So we ran, like say, 7 total courses. I don't know the number of people in each, but I got to tell you, there was at least 100 in each class. It started,
Well,
and uh, and the reason they ran it, I found out later, is that somebody decided it was cheaper. Maybe they probably said more efficient, but cheaper to train them at Camp Mabry than to send them to Fort Benning for
mhm.
3 or 4 weeks. And that's why they ran it. So
Well, you ran your course a little bit different than I mean, I've known the SF guys, reserve guys have ran like jump schools, and it was like a 2 week course. But you
right.
all ran yours. You ran yours a little bit different. That's kind of
Yeah. Yeah, it was different. And I'm not going to say it was better. I don't know if it was worse, but what we did is we did alternating weekends. There were 5 training weekends with one, which included a jump weekend. And there was an extra weekend in case there was a weather issue. So there were 6 planned weekends, but 5 of them were the ones that were really trained. And the Black Hats would report one weekend before just to get prepped for it and get organized. But the students would go through 5, and they would be every other weekend. So they would come in on a Friday, report in on a Friday, they'd be released on a Sunday, and then 2 weeks later, it repeated for the 5 times. Um, we used to discuss, I in particular discuss, is this a good deal or not? Because muscle memory's better if you're doing it continuously.
Mhm.
So that I thought was a negative about separating it. A positive for the students was, and we ran the course hard. There was no softness in it, and because so especially the guy the 2 of the top NCOs in there, Fred Kurt and Sergeant McKeska. they were like they're like Korean style World War II, drill
Yeah.
sergeants. That's how they. So we put these kids, at the time, kids through a pretty tough school physically.
Crashing is what you're saying.
Yeah. So the good news for them was if they left on Sunday, they had time for their bodies to recover before they came back 2 weeks later.
Yeah.
So that may help. But the bad news was it also gave them some thinking. Do I really want to do this? So we did lose, we didn't lose half of them, but we lost a reasonable number of them between the first couple of weekends. Like they said, I don't need this crap. It's not worth
Yeah.
it, kind of thing. But it was interesting. Again, we didn't have any injuries that I recall. That somebody during a discussion that led to our meeting said that on their last jump, which was in jump school number 7, on night jump, somebody did get injured, and the students were held up on a tarmac for long hours. I don't deny that. I don't remember that. I know it wouldn't have been my stick because I was a jump master on that last night. It's on my log. In fact, I probably jump mastered this guy, but I don't remember anybody being hurt. If it had been on my stick, I would have recalled that. Now, I think I mentioned to you one time in our earlier discussions that I put a student in the trees by accident, well, not by accident, by my stirrup, but he survived, so it's all okay.
Well, you were jumping out on, did you say Camp Swift out of Bastrop? That was where the
Yeah.
DZ was? That's,
Camp,
that's not a big DZ.
no, I think it was like probably a 22nd DZ, something like that.
Yeah, that sounds
You know,
about right.
it was Blackwell Drop Zone at Camp Swift, Texas.
Okay, that's on
Yeah.
mine. I've
Yeah.
got several on that
And I
one.
don't know if you know about Camp Swift. Camp Swift in World War II is actually a POW camp.
Actually, I've been to Camp Swift so many
Yeah.
times.
Well, all our training, when we trained, that was at Camp Swift
Yeah.
most of the time. Yeah. Yeah.
Real quick question, and for guys who've been to Camp Swift, but in my era going to Camp Swift, there was that dog food plant there on one side, and if the wind is just right, that place smells horrible.
I don't recall that. I'm not saying I just don't recall that. But funny thing, at Brenham, Texas, is a home of Bluebell ice cream.
Uh-huh.
And the Bluebell original factory was about 2 blocks from the armory.
Oh,
So
okay.
I had a better program than you had at the dog food factory. So we could go down there. This is before the huge factory they have now. We would just go down there and grab ice cream. It was like almost out of a house at the time. It was so small. But
Wow.
that was our deal. So
That's crazy.
yeah, but we did other jumps other places, but in fact, the training jumps, I was looking at the jumps from the jump schools that I was in, and all of them were at Camp Swift except for one. One jump we did at Fort Hood, Texas. Antelope Drop Zone at Fort Hood, Texas. I don't recall why we did that. It wasn't connected to any summer camp or anything like that, but that's the way
Yeah,
it was.
probably just availability, but that is one of the worst drop zones in the world because, or there was in my era, because there's piles of rocks everywhere, so the tanks can cross the creeks without destroying the creeks. And you exit the aircraft and you look down, there's all these white spots. Like, oh my God, the drop zone's full of obstacles.
Yep. 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 No, there's a couple of them I've been on. The nice thing at Bragg, of course, as you know, is especially back in that day, you remember how they used to till the grass. It was
Yeah.
all sandy. The only thing you really had to worry about was high winds or missing the drop zone. But the drop zone itself wasn't, except for a couple of airstrips, are pretty easy drop zones.
They were
Now,
awesome.
one thing in the guard, all my jumps in the guard, and I have like 30 something jumps in the guard. The good news, they were mostly out of CH-47s. So we helicopter tailgates. I mean, that was pretty cool. Number of C-130s, but mostly the Chinooks. But the drop zones were all crap. I don't remember a drop zone that wasn't a nice one to jump on, put it that way.
There's a decent one at Fort Walters over there. I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head, but it's not bad. It's long and there's not a lot of rocks on it. So
yeah. Well, I do remember one thing about the jump school. That first jump I made as a jump master in that third my first jump school as a black hat for the Guard. That was my first jump I had made since about a year earlier when I on St. Mary Gleason drop zone at Fort Bragg. I probably did the worst PLF in my life because I wound up breaking my leg in eight places, my right leg in 8 places. And mainly the tibia was a spiral break. I remember landing and watching my boot break off like an L,
Hmm.
and medevac to Womack and all that kind of junk. And so this is my first jump. And I was a little bit worried about
Mhm.
how my leg would handle it. Would I handle it? I did the softest, most beautiful PLF in the world. It's the only time I've done one that good, but anyway, it got me back on. I got back on the horse. I'll put it that way.
Yeah.
So it was, and that would have been on the Antelope or Cat Swift uh, drop zone there.
Yeah.
So
Black.
whatever I hit was good at that day.
Yeah. Blackwell's not bad for helos, but it's for C-130. It's a little short, I thought, but
A little small. Yeah. I mean, again, I don't, 20 seconds, it may not have been that. It may only been a 10-second drop zone or something like that.
I'd have to
But we
look.
used to jump at, yeah, we also we did a demonstration jump at Ellington Air Force Base one time. It was when they have an air show,
Hmm.
and we jumped, and you talk about obstacles. If you look at where the airstrip was, parallel to that is a line of basically stakes with barbed wire that would separate Ellington from the neighboring. Well, we were dropped floating towards that, and I remember looking, it looked like punji stakes coming. I mean, no one got harmed, but when you're up in the air looking down and all you see are these iron rods sticking up,
Sticking.
it's like, yeah, that sent the pucker factor up on that one, on that demonstration jump.
Well, and here's something. I mean, this is super cool stuff, but I was in the 1st Battalion Airborne 143rd. We brought back the Airborne Battalion in 2009. But there's not a lot of people knew that Texas had an Airborne Brigade going back to like the late 60s.
Yeah, yeah,
You
it
want to talk a
started
little bit about that?
Yeah, the history so I recall, like you said, it started it up in the late 60s and it went through and they deactivated it off of airborne. Well, the 36 was deactivated and absorbed into gosh, I forgot, an armor unit, I think,
Yeah.
that Guard armor unit.
49th Panzer.
Okay, and there was also a aviation group because my buddy Brian
Mhm.
uh, was there for a while, and then they had G Company, the Ranger Company, that was formed from that. But I think it was roughly 1980.
Yeah.
Don't hold me to that, because I had got out of the Guard when I graduated from college, and they were part of the reason was they were going off airborne status, and I
Mhm.
said, well, I'm doing it for the jumping, type of
Yeah.
thing. And I got my master wing, so I'm not going to get any more than that. So I'm good to
Yeah.
go. And I want to start off in my new career. So I went ahead and got out of the Guard. Uh, Whereas my buddy Brian, who when he ETS from division and came back to Texas, he joined the Guard and he was a platoon sergeant for the AT platoon in Brenham. So we were all jumping. He was a black hat and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Well, instead he went to G Company. But anyway, what we had in that time period was two battalions, the 1st and 2nd of the 143rd. I was in the combat support company of the 2nd Battalion, 143rd. And if I recall right, it seemed like the 1st Battalion was more northern Texas and the
Yeah.
2nd Battalion was more southern Texas. I seem to recall that was the way it was kind of geographically divvied up. And the only time we were ever together was, of course, on the 2-week training for the summer training, which was done at Fort Chaffee, Arkansas, primarily.
Hmm.
Yeah, there were two battalions, fully airborne, full airborne brigade. And like I say, we were attached to the 82nd. And then when I don't know the reason rationale behind it, but it was taken off airborne status and deactivated. And I didn't even think there was a 36 anymore until during, when the Gulf War or that time period, I started seeing photographs and, news reports of people, and I saw the T patch.
Yeah.
So at some stage, they reactivated the 36. So I don't know how long it was deactivated in that
I don't know either. I know they brought up that the 49th Armored Division, which everybody called the 49th Panzer.
Okay.
And I know that, GCO was deactivated in the 90s.
Hmm.
And but Texas still had that 143rd Lurch detachment, which was still on jump status.
Which
And
I'd never heard of that one, but I
yeah,
know
it was it
so
was
long I would.
it was the divisional Lurch detachment for the 49th. And then, oh shoot, that became a Lurch company in 2007. And they brought SF back to Texas in the mid 2000s. And then 2009, they brought back the Airborne Battalion. And we've got a little.
Oh, sure. Are you on?
Yep.
Got you.
Here,
All
let
right.
me get. Yeah, man, we were just having some serious internet problems today. but but where did I leave off at?
You talk about the 49th and the 143rd and what unit was still
They
around.
they had a Lurch detachment, and which became a Lurch company in 2007. We brought back the Airborne Battalion in 2009,
Okay.
and there was a SF companies I think were brought back in the mid 2000s.
Hmm.
I mean, Texas right now has a huge airborne force. I mean, probably bigger than a lot of third world countries. But
Yeah. No, I think it's great. I was disappointed when they took them off status, and the only one they had at the time was the G Company,
and the
and
Pathfinders, they had a Pathfinder detachment too.
yeah, I don't remember that. But again, the G Company, actually Fred Kurt, who was one of the Blackats I'd mentioned earlier in the school, he was the first sergeant for G Company,
Mm-hmm.
and he reached out to me and asked me if I wanted it to come and run. It had been basically their LERP platoon
Mm-hmm.
and G Company. And I actually went and it's something I regret. I wish I had done it, but I thought they were wolfing more than they were going to do. I
Yeah.
thought it was we're going to do all this kind of cool training and stuff like that, and I just no, I don't believe you. So I told Fred I was not going to bother, but I appreciated the opportunity. Uh, I regret that because my buddy Brian went there. He was in that company
They did.
and he did a lot of cool training. And the most jealous thing I am of it is he got his British wings, but unlike a lot of people get foreign wings by just having, a jump master, that he went through their British jump school,
Yeah,
which
pretty cool.
which is pretty cool. And he did a lot of other cool with SAS and a lot of, over it was just he did it for quite a few years. He didn't pull out 20. I think he had like 14, 15 years total between active and
Yeah.
he kind of regrets not having done it too, but he had personal reasons that he decided to get out. And after a while, I figured I was too old to bother with it anymore, and I established my career. But that is a regret. I wish I'd stayed with G Company and taken that opportunity. It would have been cool.
Well, I tell you what, they did a hell of a lot in Texas, and there is a wall at the museum at Camp Mabry that's all airborne, all about the airborne stuff. And in Building 4, there's airborne stuff, and
Okay.
which,
Well, you
which
mentioned
talks
that.
about the brigade. But there's not that much about the jump school. You all are kind of like a legend.
I think I've forgotten one to the most part because I one time I went back I was in Texas visiting friends and family, and I wanted to drive to Brenham, Texas. I wanted to pay uh, homage to Sergeant Jaster, who had passed. So, and he was a Brenham boy, so he was born, bred, and buried there. And so I went to his grave, but it wasn't that far. Brenham's not that big a town. I said, well, let me go by the armory and check it
Mhm.
out. And I went there. It's a weekday, and they had a guy who works full time there. And he knocked on the door. He opened up, and I just, hey, I used to drill here a long time ago. And do you mind if I just kind of look around it? Of course, looking at a concrete walled buildings really exciting, or brick
Yeah.
wall. But anyway, okay, memories. And I looked around. They had stuff on the walls, old
Yeah.
pictures, photographs, but they had nothing about the 36th Airborne.
Yeah.
And I asked him about that. He goes, "What are you talking about?" I said, "Well, the 36th Airborne Brigade back in the 70s, this is where we drilled." And I'd never heard of
Blank
it.
stares.
Yeah, it was blank stares. And it's like, okay, well, and that was kind of, for me, it was like, wow, we didn't conquer the world, but that was a bit of history that was forgotten where it actually occurred, at least one of the
Mhm.
places. So my buddy Brian and he went to UT when he got out of the Army, and so was going to Austin for something. So we said, well, let's go by Camp Mabry. So we went down there and we looked around, and at that time, and this would have been early 80s maybe, we didn't see anything other than the old 34-foot tower was still there. We
Yeah.
went into whatever they had. It was kind of a museum area. And
Hmm.
I know that area because when we ran the jump schools, the students used to be housed in one of these two-story buildings right by where the adjutant general's house is.
Yeah.
And we'd hold PT out there in that field where there's a
Big running track.
yeah, that's where we do the runs, and that's where we do PT in the morning. And of course, they ate chow. There's a mess hall there. Um, but now one of these buildings had become like a museum.
Yeah,
And
one of the two. I think it's a two-story building next to the track,
mhm,
across the road. I think it's near. It's been a little bit of time since it's actually turned into a pretty decent museum. I mean, they've got armor. They've got a German assault anti or self-propelled gun from. They actually drive once a year.
wow. Yeah. Well, when we went in this thing, it was an okay museum, but there was nothing about the 36 in it that
Yeah.
we found. So I'm glad to hear that. It gives us a reason to go back, and I in preparation for this, I did go down to downstairs and to box and found some stuff. And I don't. This is
That's cool.
the helmet, the black hat helmet that we wore in jump school when we're in the plane,
Yeah.
uh, kind of thing. So I don't have a lot of use for it. My kids may or may not want it. I will check with them. But if the museum there has a section on the jump school, I'm going to reach out to them about seeing if they would like to have this, as part of
Yeah.
the museum, because it's again a little piece of the history
If
and
you
all that kind of stuff.
Are there any pictures of the? I wonder if there's any. I haven't really seen any pictures. Have you?
Oh, well, I've got an album. They're the old faded yellow pictures.
Yeah.
There's some in there. One of them, they're reminding me about this helmet because I hadn't opened this box for a long, long time. There's a picture of me jump mashing. Somebody took a picture of me when I was doing the door check, hanging out the
Hmm.
door, and I've got this helmet on. So,
Oh,
it's one
that's
of those
cool.
pictures. So the guy said, "Oh, I wonder if I still got that helmet." Because it's cool because I do have my helmet that I had in the 82nd, and every jump I made it, and I kept it when I got out.
Hmm.
Every military I made except for when I wore this as jump master, and of course jump school. Uh, I have this helmet, and
Hmm.
so I know I have that one,
Yeah.
and I couldn't remember if I'd kept this one or not, and I did. And I also had kept we used to have T-shirts with the Master Wings
Yeah.
black. I picked it up; it fell apart like it was something from the Civil War. So I don't think I can donate that one, but uh,
Yeah.
yeah, we have pictures from jump school. They're like I say in an album, and if there's any place that you'd like me I I provide them if there's a way of doing that, I'm happy to because it's pictures of some of the students being trained, the tower, jumping from the tower and stuff like that.
I don't know, but I know the man to ask.
All right.
That will do. We could.
That's the man to get them in touch. I'm happy to share what I got. And I know my buddy Brian probably has some too. So,
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what, Eddie, I very much appreciate you coming on the show and telling us about this bit of airborne history. And man, it's been a pleasure to meet you and talk with you. And I'll reach out and see let's see what we can do.
Yeah, yeah, I would love that. I would love that. Well, I would like to first of all appreciate what you're doing, capturing the history, because there are probably a lot of untold bits of history that just get completely lost. And
Yeah.
what you do, and I compliment you and commend you for doing that.
Well, I
I would
appreciate
just
that.
like to acknowledge, if I can, my three children. They all served. My daughter was a military intelligence officer for 8 years in special operations and special forces, with
Outstanding.
deployments in Afghanistan, Iraq, and Syria.
Yeah.
She just got out couple years ago. My two boys, both 11 Bravos,
Hmm.
both served in Afghanistan, wearing very well-earned CIBs, each one of them. One was with the 4th ID and one was with the 82nd when he was over there. So, and one of the proudest moments of my life was my daughter when she came back from Afghanistan. She then went to jump school, and I got to pin my original wings that I got
Awesome.
on her. And I got to pin my stepson when he went through jump school. So I just want to commend, the children, that I never necessarily wanted them to go in the military. I never steered them that way, but they all did. But they're all home safe and sound now, which is the most important thing.
Do they live in Texas? And if so,
No, they do not.
oh,
One
darn it,
back
darn
here
it.
in Midland, Michigan. Well, two of the boys are back here in Midland because
Hmm.
for them, this is home. That's
Yeah.
where they're both born. And the daughter, depends. She lives outside DC right now. She works
Yeah.
for
Okay. Yeah. Never, it never hurts to ask.
a company that is based in DC. And yeah, yeah, yeah. So, but as a father, I now understand my mom's look when they went away, when they picked me up to take me. The look she had, a mixture of pride and fear. I never understood it. I understand it with having kids that did their duty. So anyway, but thanks again for putting this together. I appreciate you keeping this bit of the history alive.
All right. Hey, friends and neighbors, countrymen, again, great thanks to our guest, Eddie Kennedy. Everybody out there, let's continue to train. Let's, God bless each and every one of you. God bless the guys who are still out there doing the deed, and God bless America.